7. Okay, we're going to read this evening from two passages in the book of Esther. Just before Job is the little book of Esther. And we're going to read Esther chapter 3 and the first 11 verses, and then Esther chapter 4 and the first 3 verses. I'll be telling you the story of the book this night anyway. But first of all, Esther chapter 3, 1 to 11. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, Why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai, wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. In the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman, from day to day, from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people of all the provinces of thy kingdom. And their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said to Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as seemeth good to thee. Just then note 3 verses in chapter 4, the first 3 verses. After this, when Mordecai heard about it, it says, When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and cried a loud and bitter cry. And it came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Amen, and God will bless his inspired word. The book of Esther is a unique book in the Bible. There's no other book like it. Do you know why? The book of Esther is the only book in the Bible where God is never mentioned by name. God is not mentioned by his name. The word God doesn't appear. And yet, it is a book in which we see God's sovereignty and his fingerprint prints in the providence of God in governing all situations. I want to start by firstly tonight giving you the background of the events that happen in this book. And the first thing is the time that it happened. These events took place between 485 and 465 BC. It's good to have a timeline of the Old Testament in your mind. Creation, 4000 BC, roughly. Abraham, 2000 BC. Moses, 1500 BC. King David and Solomon, 1000 BC. Israel, the northern kingdom, taken away, 722 BC. The exile of the Jews into Babylon, 598 BC. And then they returned 70 years later. Well, these events happened 485 to 465 BC. Many of the Jews had already returned from the exile in Babylon 20 to 30 years ago. Ezra had already built again the house of God in Jerusalem in 515 BC. The events in Esther take place between Ezra chapter 6 and chapter 7. 20 years after the temple has been rebuilt, many Jews are still living in what was once called Babylon, but is now called the Persian Empire, because the Persians took over Babylon. Remember, under Belshazzar, and it became the Medes and the Persians, the Persian Empire. Not many of the Jews, most of the Jews that were exiled to Babylon never came back to Jerusalem. Most of them stayed in Babylon. So that's the time. The place where this happened is the Persian Empire, as I've just said. A few generations of Jews had been born in Persia and grew up there. They had jobs there. They had married there. They had children there. And Persia was all they'd ever known. 2 or 3 generations. And it was their home. They didn't want to go back to a country, Israel, that they'd never seen, most of them. A country with a faltering economy. A country where there was hard work rebuilding the walls with Nehemiah. A country where there was always a threat of enemy attack. No, they were an accepted part of the empire of Persia, the world's superpower at the time. The events in the book of Esther take place in a city called Susa, which is found in modern-day Iran. One of the 3 capital cities of the Persian Empire, Susa. Susa is the king's winter palace, apparently. The citadel, or the palace, in the city of Susa, according to chapter 1 and verse 5, is where these events take place. The citadel was an acropolis, a fortified castle, basically, or fortified palace that stood 120 feet above the level of the rest of the city. On the map, if you want to know where the city of Susa is, you find the Persian Gulf, the tip of the Persian Gulf, and you go northwest, which is north-left, left and up a bit, inland about 100 miles on the map. And that's where the city of Susa was. The Persian Empire was vast. 127 provinces, chapter 1, verse 1 of the book of Esther. It stretched from India all the way to Ethiopia. And each province was ruled by a local ruler called a satrap, who was All of the satraps were accountable to the king of Persia. The king was an absolute monarch. He ruled and told everybody what to do. The king, during the time of the book of Esther, in which we're reading, was King Ahasuerus, he is called here. In secular history, kings have many different names. This is King Xerxes. Ahasuerus, Xerxes. You may have heard of him. He reigned from 485 to 465 BC. And as a person, King Ahasuerus or Xerxes is described by secular history as a reckless, sensual, cruel, capricious man. It was King Xerxes, this king, that led the Persian Empire to war with the Greek city-states to an extent that hadn't ever happened before. It was King Xerxes that led 500,000 Persians into the Thermopylae Pass and faced the 300 Spartans that you've heard of from history. This is this king from the book of Esther. That's the first person, the people that are involved in this story. King Xerxes, or Ahasuerus. The second person of note is the person called Haman. Haman is a cruel man who has just been promoted, as I read from chapter 3, promoted to be the prime minister of the Empire of Persia. He's the second in command. He's an Agite, according to chapter 3, verse 1, which means he is connected with Agag, the king of the Amalekites, which were the arch enemies of Israel and the Jews. Another person in the story is called Esther. Esther was simply a Jewish girl who had lost both her parents. Her parents had both died. And Mordecai was her cousin, and he took her in and looked after this little girl Esther as his own daughter. We can tell that according to chapter 2 and verse 7. We can also tell from that passage that Esther, as she grew up, was startlingly beautiful. And she became the queen of the Persian Empire in the year 479 BC. Although it wasn't through her own choice. She had no choice in the matter. Mordecai, who we're going to look at next, he visited her when she was taken away into the harem to be made ready for marriage to this king. So there's the time, there's the background. The time, 485 to 465 BC, the place, the kingdom of Persia, the empire of Persia, and the city of Susa, and the people, the king, the prime minister, and the Jewish girl who became the queen. Which brings me to the second point. The man, Mordecai. He plays a predominant role in the story. He's a believing Jew with a good job. He worked in the palace, in the citadel up on the Acropolis above Susa. It tells us quite often he was in the king's court, the king's gate. We often find him in the king's gate, chapter 2 verse 21, chapter 3 verse 2, chapter 5 verse 9, chapter 13 verses 6, 10 and 12. The word officially means he was a Persian official. He worked for the government in a high power job. The second thing we note about Mordecai was that he was a kind and caring man. He took care of Esther and looked after her. Chapter 2 verses 6 and 7. And when she was taken into the palace, it tells us in chapter 2 verse 11 that Mordecai visited her every single day. He is obviously a caring man. The third thing we note about him is his honesty. He's honest and just. He's not a rebel. Because we read in chapter 2 verse 21 and 23 that when two men called Bigthan and Teresh, who were the king's guards, who guarded the threshold, and the threshold is the doors to the throne room, when they made a plan to assassinate the king, Mordecai found out through Esther, or told Esther, he found out, told Esther, and Esther told the king, and the king investigated this event and had both these two soldiers executed. And it was written down, and this is worth noting, according to chapter 2 and verse 23, this event was noted down in the chronicles of the king, like his diary. Many, many books made up the king's diary of what happened each day and decisions that were made, and this was recorded in the chronicles of the king. Remember that for later. We note also Mordecai was a man of prayer who encouraged others to pray. He prayed in sackcloth and ashes, chapter 4 verse 1, fasting, and he called for the other Jews to do likewise. And we know also about him that he refused to pay homage to Haman, the wicked prime minister in the king's court. He wouldn't bow down to him, and he stuck to his guns. It tells us in chapter 3, verses 2 to 4. I read it already, I'm not going to read it again. Everyone bowed down to it, but Mordecai wouldn't. The king's servants noticed this. They said to Mordecai, why are you not going to bow down? And he still wouldn't do it. His word was his bond. He wasn't going to bow down, and that's all there was to it. And it didn't make any difference, even when they told Haman, and Haman was furious, he still didn't bow down to him. And it was a witness. Mordecai's refusal to bow and the willingness to stick by his word was a witness to those that saw him, because they were watching, it says, to see if this man of God would, according to chapter 3 and verse 4, look what it says. He hearkened not unto them, and they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand. To see whether he would stand by what he said. They were watching, and when he did stand by what he said, they noticed it. When he wouldn't change no matter what. He didn't bow, and he never bowed to the evil Haman. So that's the second point. Mordecai, the person, a faithful Jew who was a palace official, kind and caring, honest and just, a man of prayer, and a man of his word. When he gave his word, he stuck to it, and that was it. Now we come to the third point, which is the problem. There's a problem in verses 5 and 6 of chapter 3. When Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai, and wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. The problem is evil Haman, the prime minister. His fury, his hatred that comes from his pride. A very proud man. And it wasn't enough when he noticed that Mordecai wouldn't bow down. It wasn't enough just to punish the one man. That wasn't sufficient. Such was his pride as a man of power. He decided, as men often do who are men of power, they think they're bigger than what they are, and they decide, I'm going to exterminate all the Jews in the whole empire. It's not enough to punish one man. I'm going to have mass genocide and wipe out a whole people. That was his idea. Mass homicide. Adolf Hitler was not the first to plan mass homicide. Neither was he the last. Neither was Stalin. Stalin was far worse than Hitler. Hitler killed about 8 or 9 million Jews, which is horrendous, and other people that he didn't like as well. Stalin killed over 50 million of his own people in concentration camps. And America has recently bypassed even Stalin's murder rate, because the United States of America now has had over 70 million abortions. Mass murder. So Hitler wasn't the first or the last. This evil Haman, the Prime Minister, was one of these evil, wicked men that overstretched themselves. Evil Haman approaches the king. And he tells the king, I've already read it to you, there are subversive people living in the empire. You know, they're not your people. They have their own wee rules. They don't obey your law very much. They'd rather obey their law. And it's not very profitable to have these people in the empire. And note what he says. I'll pay you 10,000 talents of silver into your treasury, king. That is a massive bribe, okay? Bribery. 10,000 talents of silver. That is calculated by historians to be 2/3 of the annual tax revenue from the entire Persian Empire. Imagine for a year. And he's offering 2/3 of the annual tax revenue of the whole empire in a year, a 2/3 bribe to allow the king, get the king to allow him to kill all the Jews. A massive bribe. I'll put this into the king's treasury, he says, if you give me the authority to exterminate the Jews. And the king said okay, because he's a politician. And can you imagine what it'd be like if someone in Westminster said, you know, if a rich person approached him and said, you know, I'll put 2/3 of whatever the amount of income that the United Kingdom makes in a year, the whole economy, I'll put 2/3 of that amount into your personal bank account if you allow me to do such and such. Boy, they'd be stamping the letter straight away, wouldn't they? Sure, we've seen it even in the scams, in their expenses claims. How much more would they sell people down the river for that amount of money? And the king said okay, and took his signet ring and stamped it, and it became law. The problem was basically this. An evil man in power, because of pride which filled him with hatred and anger, he draws up evil legislation against God's people. That's how you sum it up, isn't it? And that's what Haman did in the corridors of power, isn't it? I could say that's what the British government has done in the corridors of power. Evil men drawing up wicked legislation against God's people. That's the background. I've given you 2 points so far. The time, the place, the people involved. The man Mordecai, a good man, kind and caring, honest and just, a man of prayer. His word was his bond. The problem was the third point. Haman, the evil man, brings in his evil legislation, planning mass murder of the people of God. Well, what happened? Chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Mordecai rent his clothes and went about in sackcloth and ashes, and cried and wept and fasted and prayed. And he came right up to the king's gate, but he couldn't go in because he was in sackcloth. What happened? What happened in this time when an evil politician was passing wicked legislation? Mordecai, the man of God, wept and prayed for the people of God, because it always starts there. And then, you don't stop there, then the man of God, Mordecai, went to the woman of God in the place of authority, the queen, the place of power and authority, and challenged the woman of God in the place of authority, to stand up now and use her influence and do something about it. Chapter 4, verses 6 to 8, that's where that's recorded. So Hatshepsut went forth to Mordecai on the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told them of all that had happened to him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. And he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given in Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go to the king and make supplication unto him, and make a request before him for her people. And what happened? Esther sent a message back, and she said basically, and I'm paraphrasing, I can't go in before the king. Because you can't go in before the king uninvited. Whoever enters the throne room of the king, and this is true, uninvited, the law says they are to be put to death. You can't go in uninvited. And you'll automatically be put to death unless when the king sees you, he takes a golden scepter and stretches it out towards you, and you can touch the tip of it, and if he does that, your life will be spared. But if he doesn't do that, the penalty for going in uninvited is death. And Esther says, and I haven't been invited into the throne room for the last 30 days. That's verses 10 and 12 of chapter 4. And this reply that Esther makes, it's understandable. But this reply prompts one of the classic texts in the whole of the Old Testament. A well-known text. In chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, here's the reply. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Queen Esther, don't hold your peace now of all times. You see, Mordecai in this passage trusts in God's providence, doesn't he? Because he says in verse 14, verse 14 tells us that he believes that God uses instruments to deliver his people. Okay? And that God will deliver his people. He's confident in that. If not by Esther, some other way. He tells her that. But then he challenges her and he says, Queen Esther, now is the time for you to make a stand. And Queen Esther, who knows but that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? God's providence. You know what he's saying? He's saying, my cousin, my queen, just remember this. Could it not be in God's plan that God has put you there in the palace as the queen for just this very reason, at this very time? To make a stand. Of course he does. Then what happened? The woman of God, in the place of authority and power, says, yes, I will make a stand. Pray and fast for me for 3 days, and I'll go into the throne room, and if I perish, I perish. That's what she says in the last few verses of chapter 4. She said that she would break the law to rescue God's people. And it was breaking the law, make no mistake. To go into the throne room.